What's going on, YouTube? Welcome back to Fireside Rangers. I'm your host, Eric Wilson. Today, joined by my co-host, Collin Alcaves. Once again, as promised, like we said yesterday, today we're going to be doing a little bit of a deep dive into some potential trade targets the Rangers could make this season. I know it's a little bit early, and the trade deadline is still a little whiles away. However, now I think 23, 24 games into the season, the Rangers have had some time to kind of look at this lineup, analyze some holes in the roster, and I definitely think the number one spot that needs to be touched upon is that first line right wing. Kaapo Kakko wasn't the answer. Blake Wheeler isn't the answer. And sure, Brodzinski's been playing all right now, but I don't really see him as a long-term solution up there. So the Rangers are probably most likely going to be looking to add on some depth in that position later on the season at some point. So we're going to cover some early potential trade targets the Rangers could certainly and probably should look into a little bit. But before we really dive into things, make sure you guys like, subscribe, ring that bell so you don't miss notification. If you're watching us on Apple or Spotify, be sure to give us a 5-star review. And throughout the episode, be sure to leave your thoughts down in the comment section below on all of the players that we're going to be discussing today. And lastly, be sure to follow us on all of our social media platforms at Fireside Rangers on both Instagram and X. But before we really get into things, Collin, how are you doing today? And who's the first player on your list of potential trade targets?
I'm good. Hoping for a better outcome last night in that Sens game. Obviously, didn't get it. On to the next. Looking forward to talking about some guys that'll help bolster this lineup and make us that way we don't lose games like that. So the first guy that I think we should talk about is Jordan Eberle from the Seattle Kraken. So I don't know if you want to dive into his stats or.
Yeah, I mean, I'll get right into it. Eberle, Rangers fans know him, spent a lot of time in New York, but with the other team over there, the Islanders, until he moved over to Seattle. And since he's been on Seattle, he's been a solid forward. Definitely not the best player that we're going to be discussing today, but he's pretty solid. He's played 23 games over there in the Western Conference so far this season. He has just 3 goals, 9 assists, and 12 points. So he's probably on pace for maybe like a high 30s, low 40 point season, which isn't bad whatsoever. And I know Seattle is doing decent this season, but I can only imagine that their stats would go up if he were playing for the Rangers. And he's a solid guy. I think, like I said, not the best player we're going to be discussing, but for the cost of what he would probably be, I think it might be a little more worth it for the Rangers, because one thing to keep in mind as we go through this entire list of players, the Rangers don't have too much money to spend. Right now, they have about $6.5 million due to LTIR cap space, but that's not going to be like that forever. And the Rangers are probably going to have to move some players, maybe Goudreau, maybe Wheeler or someone else, who knows, to try to clear up a little bit of cap space there. So price is definitely a factor to play here. And I don't know what Seattle would be asking for in return for Eberle, but I'm sure it wouldn't be too much. And his cap hit isn't the craziest either. He's currently on a 5.5 mil cap hit. I'm sure the Rangers could sweeten the deal to get them to retain maybe half of that, and it wouldn't be too bad. And speaking of contracts, I know of the players we're going to be naming today, some of them have no trade clauses, others don't. I don't know the exact specifications on these no trade clauses. I know Eberle's is a modified one, but for the sake of this discussion, we're just going to say that of the players that have trade clauses, we will say that they want to join the New York Rangers and they're totally okay with waiving it, just to not make this like a 2-hour long discussion. But that's my take on Eberle. Not my favorite that we're going to be naming, but I wouldn't be mad whatsoever if the Rangers were to go out and trade for him.
I agree. I think you look at a guy like Eberle, he was there for the deep runs with the Islanders. He made a deep run last year with the Kraken, and he's a solid contributor. Obviously, 12 points in 23 games so far this season. It doesn't exactly jump off the page, but the Kraken haven't gotten off to the start that they were expected to. They're not doing nearly as well as they were last year. And so, you put him on a team that's contending, and I think those numbers jump up quite a bit. But, he has that pedigree. He has the playoff experience. Obviously, he hasn't won one. But at this point in what we're looking for, we just need a competent right winger to help complement the top 6. And I think he would do just that, adding a nice blend of, he plays a little bit of a north-south game where he's not afraid to get pucks on net. But, he also has that skill and finesse that we love to see. So I think that's a very intriguing option. But we got plenty more here. So I'll just dive into the next one, and then I'll let you take the one after that. Next up, we got Anthony No, that's not his name. What is it? Duclair. I only know his first name. Was it Anthony? I was right.
Duclair.
For some reason I thought I got it wrong there. Anthony Duclair. Former Ranger, started with the Rangers, 6 goals, 4 assists for 10 points, 23 games. Again, playing on a struggling Sharks team, but we saw what he was able to do with the Panthers in these past seasons, and we saw the goal that he scored against us the other night. It was a beauty. He's again, wicked shot, drive to the net type of player. He comes in to cap it at $3 million, which is easy for them to eat. You can throw in a sweetener and have them take some of that money back. Or I think what's going to happen realistically is it would have to involve a third team, and they would have to eat another 25% of it. So that way it would be like a 50 and a 25, just because a single team can't retain more than 50%. That's the max. So it would, I think with the Rangers up against the cap, it would require a third team, and it would also require us to throw some picks. But we have picks in these upcoming drafts, and I'm not really trying to take picks anymore. We're in a phase where we kind of got to trade it and sell out. We got the prospects that I think we need. We got Robertson, we got Perot, and we got Othman. I think right now that our prospect pool isn't doing too bad. We got Bryce, I forget his name, but he's been popping off as well.
McConnell Barker.
That's it. I am right there every time. I started to say McConnell, and then I questioned myself. But, I think, like I said, some money would have to be retained. But he's another player that I'd be interested in seeing the Rangers reunite with. One of a couple players that we're talking about reuniting with, but we'll get into that a little bit later.
I think you said it pretty well. Duclair, I enjoyed watching him when he was on the Rangers the first time, and ever since he's departed, he hasn't been bad whatsoever. I know, kind of similarly to Eberle, you look at his stats and you're not immediately blown away, 10 points in 23 games played, but like you mentioned, he's on a struggling Sharks team, and I feel like even more so than Eberle, once he would be, if he were to be on a more successful teams such as the Rangers, those numbers would definitely boost a little bit. It's kind of hard to get things done over there in San Jose right now with former Rangers coach David Quinn leading that team to wherever it is that they're going. But they've actually been winning games recently. Who knows what's going on over there? They might have finally found the key to success with whatever they got. But I do want to dive into the next player, another player that would be a reunion with the Rangers, Frank the Tank, Mr. Frank Vatrano over there in Anaheim. Now, he is playing extremely well so far this season. 14 goals, 9 assists, and 23 points in 25 games. So we're kind of moving up to the next tier of these players here, and higher quality, going to be real point producers. And I like Vatrano. I like Vatrano a lot. Still not my favorite on this list, but probably close to the top, if not number 2. And when you look back at Vatrano and that first stint he had with the Rangers, it didn't last very long, but it was a very memorable one. He was scoring a lot of goals, and he clicked very well with that first line of Kreider and Zibanejad. And when we look at these players, you need to factor in what can they contribute to the team, because just because they're a good player somewhere else doesn't exactly mean they're going to translate those skills over to New York. Like, look at Patrick Kane, for example, one of the best players of all time, joins the Rangers, and he didn't really do anything. I know there were a lot of factors that contributed towards that, but that's not really the point. There's proof and evidence that Frank Vatrano would be successful on a first line with Kreider and Zibanejad. And when you look at what we're trying to fill, that's exactly what we need. Lafreniere, he's going to stay on that second line with Panarin and Trocheck, because that line is unstoppable. We'll keep them intact no matter what. Whether it be Kakko, Wheeler, whoever's going in at that point of the season, they're going to be down on the third line. Both of them, Kakko didn't really find a lot of success on that first line. Neither did Wheeler. Brodzinski is pretty much only on the team for the remainder of Kakko's injury. So you kind of just got to assume that first line is going to be the one getting whoever the Rangers go for. Because I'm not going to say if we trade for a winger at this deadline, I'm going to already say it's going to be the Rangers' first priority. And I like Vatrano. He's a good goal scorer, and he works well with that first line. Both Kreider and Zibanejad had slower starts to the season. Now, given both of them have heated up a lot, Zibanejad especially, Kreider was always good. He just needed a little bit more room to improve. Zibanejad had a terrible start, and he's cooking now. So if Frank the Tank is going to be able to inflate those stats even higher and just even elevate the team to a newer peak, then yeah, man, go for Frank Vatrano. He's relatively cheap for what he's producing. $3.65 million year cap hit. It's relatively cheap. Like, once again, if the Rangers sweeten that deal, maybe even get Anaheim to retain some of that. And at the same time, this wouldn't even be a rental. Of the 5 players we're going to talk about today, all of them would be rentals because their contracts expire after this year, except for Vatrano. We'd have him for this year and then all of next year. So it kind of seems like the Rangers would get the most for their money by investing in Vatrano, because you get a whole nother season with them. So why not? I don't really have anything bad to say about this possibility, but I'll pass it over to you, Collin, or I don't know if my camera's inverted or not, but and let me know your thoughts on Vatrano.
Yeah, I like Vatrano. I liked it when we got him the first time. I think, and I've said this forever, he has one of the best wristers that I've seen in the league. His release is just insane. It's so fast. And I was actually watching a compilation of all the goals scored from the playoffs the year that we went to the Eastern Conference Finals against the Tampa Bay Lightning. And he had, in that first game, he just turned and shot from a high slot and ripped the corner. He did that during the regular season when he came over, and it was just a seamless fit. And I think that's exactly what that first line needs, is a guy who, because you have Kreider in front, who, forces a guy to come down low and tie him up, and he demands the respect of defensemen. And then if you put Vatrano on that line, they have to step up and block that shot. So it leaves the potential pass to Mika's office, as I call it now, even though it is correctly Ovi's office, but Mika's office, and he can continue to do his thing, or vice versa. They'll respect Mika's shot, and then Frank has a shot, and he can, and we saw what he can do. He can do serious damage on that first line. And the fact that he's not just a rental also is a little bit more enticing, but at the same time, will we have to give up more? Or how would that work? I'd be interested to see, because I don't know if the Ducks are going to be willing to eat cap for 2 seasons. So that is an interesting thing to look at as well down the line. But Vatrano is probably my favorite on this list of players that we've talked about or will talk about going forward. Just based purely on the fact that, 1, we've seen how he does in New York, and we know he can handle that pressure, and 2, he doesn't shy away from it, and in the playoffs even welcomed it. And in my opinion, he took his play to the next level, and he just really complements those guys well. So if you're looking for somebody to fill that top line role, I think he's the perfect candidate.
Yeah, I agree. The perfect candidate, almost, in my opinion, because as I said, he's probably my number 2. I got someone that I'm feeling really big on, but I'm going to save him for last, because the second to last player that I want to bring up, once again, another reunion, Vladimir Tarasenko. He was acquired last year at the deadline. The spotlight was on him for about a week, until the Rangers went and got Patrick Kane, and then everyone was talking about him, including ourselves, even months after his contract expired with the Rangers. But even though Tarasenko wasn't really the headline for the Rangers last trade deadline, he still played extremely solid. I think he was one of the more underrated acquisitions the Rangers have made at deadlines in recent years, just because he doesn't get talked about enough. He played really well with the Rangers for the remainder of the regular season, and even in the playoffs was pretty solid. There were a lot of bad performances in the playoffs for the Rangers last year, and I wouldn't really consider Tarasenko to be one of those. But after his contract expired, he did sign a 1-year, $5 million deal with the Ottawa Senators, and he's been playing pretty well over there as well. In 20 games played, he has 5 goals and 12 assists for 17 points, so he's just shy of being a point-per-game player. As we know, last night, it was the Vladimir Tarasenko revenge game against the Rangers, because he just had to net 2 goals and an assist against us, just to rub it in for us not re-signing him. But maybe we can make it back up to him and sign him or trade for him again this year, because I guess he thought that Rangers fans forgot what he was able to do, and he decided to do it against us. But Tarasenko, similarly to Vatrano, is another player that we have experience watching recently. And the experience is an overwhelmingly good one, in my opinion. He's a great goal scorer. He is a veteran forward. So he has a lot of playoff experience. He has won a Stanley Cup, I believe, out of every team on this. Every player on this list that we're talking about, he's the only one that has won a Stanley Cup. Am I correct in that, Collin?
Yes.
Yeah. So he brings valuable experience just because of that alone. And he's a big point producer. Once again, spent some time on that first line with Kreider and Zibanejad. So we know the chemistry is there. All it needs to be is just reignited, which might be easier said than done, because the Kane and Panarin chemistry didn't really work so well that second time around, but they had a lot of years apart. These guys have like a couple months. So I think the biggest concern about Tarasenko is that cap hit, $5 million for just the remainder of the season. I'm sure the Rangers could easily make it work if, once again, Ottawa is able to retain some of that cap. They're a team that's, I don't know if they're still rebuilding. I guess technically they are, because they're a good young team and they have a lot of great prospects, but still this season through 20 games played, they're at an even 500 of 10-10. So I'm sure they'd probably still be looking for younger players and maybe even high draft picks in return for Tarasenko, but it's not like the Rangers are going to have to put together a major package, send away like a couple stars or anything. Maybe they'll just take like Gaudreau in a second or something like that, and that'd make me happy. But I don't know. I think when it comes to Tarasenko, it's a very overall solid idea. Someone who you can get for cheap if you have a good GM, which we do. He's going to produce a lot of points, and he provides a lot of valuable experience. The only thing for me is it'd be another rental of Tarasenko, and then who knows what's going to happen from there. I kind of like Vatrano a little bit more just because we can get him for another year, even cheaper. But I don't know. I like Tarasenko. I'll let you provide your thoughts on him.
I'll say the great thing about most of the players that we're discussing here is they're all shoot-first players on a team of passers, except for Panarin this year, who's just been a shoot-first guy, and it's been working for him. But I feel like a lot of this team, they do too much with the pass. They do too east-west, and they need to be a little more north-south, as I've said in many videos before. And these guys are just snipers. Pretty much everybody that we've mentioned. Eberle has a little bit of passing ability, as I mentioned before. But these guys are all just, they got good shots. I know Tarasenko has more assists, but his assists, as we saw against the Rangers, are shots off or passes off the goalie, where it's just a shot low pad, and it's just a tap in after that. I'm not opposed to that one. Obviously, the money will be more difficult to work. And same with Eberle. Those are probably my least favorite, those two, simply because of the money. But if they can make it work, I'm not opposed to any of these guys, obviously. I think Tarasenko is a great player. He liked New York. He liked playing with those guys, and he was a solid contributor down the stretch last year. But I think that instead of going for these big names like we have, I think we need to look back at what has worked for us in the past, and that's going for guys like Andrew Kopp. Kopp was one of the best playoff performers that I've seen in recent memory. And again, as I was saying earlier, I was watching the highlights of all the goals scored in the playoff series where he made the deep run against the Lightning and we lost. But he was lighting it up. He was scoring multiple goals across every series. He was nonstop, a force, and he wasn't even like the top guy on most trade bait boards. So I think we need to maybe avoid the bigger names and kind of get guys that we think will work and complement. And in my opinion, like that deadline where we got Vatrano and Kopp was way better than the deadline when we got Kane and Tarasenko in terms of what it did for the team. I feel like Kane and Tarasenko were cool, and it was like, wow, flashy, big names come to Broadway. They're proven, they got the points to back it up. But when we got Vatrano, I feel like everybody's like, oh, he's going to be okay. And he blew expectations out of the water. We got Kopp, and Kopp slid into that second line, and he was tearing it up. So if you're looking at guys, you don't have to go and get the top guy out there just because of of what they've done in the past. You just need to get somebody who you think is going to mesh well. And I think that's what this next guy is going to do. I think that it's not the flashiest name, but it is a guy who would work well with this team and what they need. And I know you're excited about this one, so I'll let you jump into it.
All right. You kind of took the words right out of my mouth because we did name a lot of really good players so far this episode. And this guy, I mean, I don't know why I'm trying to be like mysterious about who it is. His face is right below you. It's Sean Monahan over there on Montreal, long-term Flame. Yeah, you got it right there. Long-term Flame, now on the Montreal Canadiens. And he's not the most skilled player on this list. Like Tarasenko and Vatrano both have more points this season than Monahan. But at the end of the day, the Rangers need to look for a player who's going to mesh really well with their play style and what they need. And I think that given the way that we've seen the Rangers play so far this season, Monahan might just be that guy. He does have 8 goals, 7 assists, 15 points in 25 games played. So he does produce points at a decent rate, which is always good to know. He is a natural center, but I'm sure we could just fit him in right on that wing. Worst case scenario, Hedl goes onto the wing, and then he kind of takes over there as a third-line center. Like, who knows at that point? But Monahan is one of those guys that's kind of looking for a little bit of a, revitalization of like a revival of his career. You know, back in the day, he was a really great forward, scoring a lot of points left and right. Injuries kind of shaking him up a little bit. Things really aren't going too hot for him on either of the teams that he's been playing for recently. But I think a chance in New York could do it. He's a bigger player. He's not afraid to get his hands dirty. He's very gritty, fast skater, and he can still produce points. He plays defense well at the same time. And I just think based on everything that he can provide on the ice and what the Rangers need, it just connects so perfectly that I feel like the Rangers would be stupid for not at least taking like a look at it. And then you bring the whole money thing into play. His contract is only $1.985 million. So you're going to go out and trade for this guy who's worth less than $2 million. You can just trade away Gaudreau and that's it. And then you have an extra million to spare, you know, like it's like an extra $1.5 million. So I think it just, you look at the checklist of things that need to be done. It's like, you'll help the Rangers, check. The Rangers need a player like him, check. The Rangers can afford him, check. So I just think in my mind, when you take all three of those factors and apply them to all five of the guys that we've talked about, he's the one that matches them up the best. So I don't know. I feel like it's also the most likely to happen just because Montreal isn't having the greatest season over there. His contract is expiring. What do they have to lose? I'm sure if the Rangers throw an offer their way, they would not be too hard to convince to say yes.
You know, I mean, I'm looking at his stats now because we didn't have time to throw him in the chat, unfortunately. But a guy who was formerly a 30-goal scorer, a point-per-game player, you know, he's has a ton of experience. He was on some deep Calgary teams that made some good runs. Now, you know, he's fell off a little bit just because he's been put into lesser roles on most of the teams that he's been on to allow the youth to excel. I know down the stretch, the Flames were getting younger, and guys like Tkachuk and Gaudreau are passing them up on those spots. I know now with the Canadians, they have a lot of young talent with Suzuki and Caulfield and whatnot. So I don't know exactly where he's playing in these lineups, but I know that he's not averaging the ice time that he was. His time on ice is down a little bit. So I'm excited to see what he could do, what he would bring to a team like the Rangers. I'm not sure exactly how well he'd mesh with Mika and Kreider, but you could say the same for any of these guys other than Vatrano and Tarasenko because none of them have been here with these two. So, you know, there's no way of knowing, but I think he's an intriguing option. I think you make a good point in saying that, you know, the cap hit is very, very big. We just can't talk about the money enough. The fact that the Rangers are so strapped for cap, that it would take so little to get him is huge. You know, not having to move a lot of money around and not having to throw in the sweeteners would be nice for a guy that is going to leave at the end of the year. So, you know, I think he would be a good fit. I think he fits in with the rest of these guys. I think that they're all very intriguing options, and I'm excited to see where Drury wants to go with this. If he gets one, or if he finds a way to get two of them, if he can finally move Gaudreau's deal off the books. But, you know, we'll see, I guess. We got plenty of time before that happens. And we also have to see where these teams are when it comes down to the deadline. Because if the Senators turn it around, Tarasenko is not being moved if they start doing well. You know, if the Ducks can get back to their winning ways, even though they were struggling the last week I checked, I believe they were on like an 8-game losing streak. But they started the season off so hot. You know, if they can turn it around again, who knows what they'll do at Vatrano. Plus, he has another year of team control, which maybe they don't want to give up. A guy like Eberle and the Kraken. The Kraken are 1 year removed from who did they lose to again? Was it? I know that Dallas. I think they lost to Dallas in the round before the conference finals. But they went to Game 7 with a really, really good Dallas team and almost competed in that Western Conference Finals. So, you know, if they can turn it around, Eberle is a guy who they took from the Islanders. They obviously like him a lot and what he brings to the team, and he's also that veteran presence. I believe he's an assistant captain. You know, I have his jersey, so I'd love to see him come to the Rangers. I have his Kraken jersey, Eberle. But, you know, all these guys I think will be great additions to the team, and I'm excited to see where Drury's head's at, what they're asking for, what he's willing to give up, and if the Wizard is able to pull off some more moves.
Yeah, that is a very important thing to note, because today we just discussed 5 players that the Rangers could potentially look towards at the trade deadline. But the trade deadline isn't even for another like 3.5 months, I think it is. So That is a very fair point that you made. Ottawa, for example, they're only 10-10. You know, a little win streak right there from then, and they're right back out of that slump that they're in and pushing towards maybe a wild card playoff spot. So I'm sure when the trade deadline gets closer, we're probably going to make another episode just like this. And I'm sure a lot of the names will be very different. Some of them might be the same. I hope Monahan is the same. As just reading up on him the last few days while I was just been thinking about it, I start to like him more and more. And he's definitely my current favorite that I hope becomes a Ranger at some point. You know, he's kind of just like what we hoped Blake Wheeler would be, in my opinion, just a little bit younger. But that about wraps up this discussion. We discussed 5 players today. For everyone watching, be sure to leave your thoughts on them down in the comment section below, your thoughts on everyone that we discussed, and maybe any names that you guys might want to see the Rangers go for that we didn't get the chance to talk about today, because we'd be here for hours and hours and hours if I talked about every player I've ever been interested in acquiring. But thank you all for watching. Make sure you guys like, subscribe, ring that bell so you don't miss a notification. If you're watching us on Apple or Spotify, be sure to give us a 5-star review, and be sure to follow all of our social media accounts at Fireside Rangers down in the comment section below. That wraps up today's episode. We'll be back tomorrow with more Rangers content. Have a good one, and let's go
Rangers.